everyone, and I'm Autobot Sonic the Telltale Gamer, bringing the latest and everything Telltale games, Transformers, and more. So this video is one I've been waiting for years and years to make. 3 years exactly, ever since I finished my review of the Transformers Animated 10th Anniversary special, where I reviewed the 3-part series premiere Transformers Animated. And yes, that's right, for any of you who don't know, today, November 26, 2020, marks the 10-year anniversary of the premiere of Transformers Prime, which is regarded by many, many Transformers fans, myself included, as the best Transformers show of all time. Now, I've been waiting so long to get back to review this, waiting years upon years to review it, and even just to get back to reviews in general, because it's been years since I've done a Cyberverse review as well. And don't worry, guys, for all you guys who are really wanting me to do another Cyberverse review, I am going to be continue doing Cyberverse. I know the whole show is finished by this point, and we've got a Cyberverse movie coming out within a few months, or maybe even by the end of next year. I don't know when exactly that's coming out, but this video is about Transformers Prime, and I am so excited to talk about this. So yes, this review actually will be split into 2 separate videos. This first video you'll be watching will be covering the first 2 episodes of the series premiere of Transformers Prime, while another video coming out next week will cover the remaining 3. And I'll get to that in a little bit, but for now, let's go ahead and dive into this review, starting by explaining what basically is Transformers Prime and how it came to be the epic show that is regarded to be the best Transformers show of all time. Also, a heads up, if any of you want to just skip to me actually reviewing the episode, because I kind of go on a tangent here, feel free to go ahead and click in the description. I'll post maybe like a link in the, like a little text blurb on the bottom of the screen showing you like what time to skip to see if you want to just skip to the actual episode review, or I'll have it probably broken up into chapters so you can further follow it if you don't want to listen to me just ramble about how the show came to be instead of just cut straight to the episode review. If you want to do that, just go ahead and click on the next chapter where the episode starts. So for those of you who don't know, Transformers Prime premiered back in 2010 on the Hub channel. Now, the Hub was essentially Hasbro's unique channel before it became Discovery Family, where it's still decently owned by Hasbro, but it's also kind of now Discovery's as well. It was originally like Discovery Kids like 20 years ago. Then in 2010 it became the Hub, and then around 2016, I believe, it got turned into Discovery Family, which is kind of like just a mix of Hasbro stuff and Discovery stuff. And so, but I'm getting off track. So basically, a lot of stuff happened with the Hub in 2010 is that Hasbro wanted to make a bunch of brand new reboots for all of their like properties. So they went ahead and made a bunch of shows. They made G.I. Joe Renegades, My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. Both of those went off to be huge hits. Obviously, My Little Pony was spectacular, and like everyone loved that show, considering it just wrapped up its 9th season last year, and its 10th season is technically being made as an IDW comic right now. But for Transformers Prime, which was the 3rd of the 3 big shows that Hasbro was making on the Hub, that was huge, because it was not only the first Transformers show in a year since Transformers Animated had wrapped up a year earlier in 2009, but it was just so big, because the creators of Transformers Prime really wanted to pay homage to the original origins of Transformers and kind of create the ultimate version of Transformers, which I think they succeeded in for the most part. So for those who don't know, Transformers Prime was created by Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci. I'm sorry if I butchered those last names. Kurtzman and Orci previously worked on the Bayverse film, specifically the first one and Revenge of the Fallen, before doing a little bit more work on Dark of the Moon, and then helped out a little bit with Age of Extinction and The Last Knight. And the fact that they worked on those Bayverse movies before coming over to Transformers Prime, it really shows, because just like Animated, Transformers Prime was heavily influenced by the Bayverse movies, and that ranges everything from the characters to the tone of the show, which is arguably the darkest Transformers show of all time, maybe only tied with like Beast Wars. And from what I've heard, Cyberverse is getting pretty dark in seasons 2 and 3. I still have yet to finish season 1 myself, but from what I've heard, seasons 2 and 3 of Cyberverse get really dark, which I'm really looking forward to. But yeah, Prime was essentially, and to this date, in my knowledge, is the darkest Transformers show. And it's not super edgy like the new War for Cybertron Netflix series. This one did it in a tasteful manner, while at the same time balancing out with a good decent amount of comedy to it, which I really, really enjoyed. It's kind of like with Transformers Prime, or Kurtzman and Orky kind of just took the best parts of the Bayverse films and just put it all together to create with their own little unique stuff to make this ultimate Transformers show, where you have, it has a lot of the good stuff from Bayverse. You've got the awesome epic like orchestral music, the awesome fight choreography, and the very, very realistic models of the Autobots and Decepticons. The humans, I understand, like, the actual art style was kind of, like, more cartoony, like, the whole 3D CGI, but the overall, like, look of the Autobots and Decepticons, you can't lie in the fact that these designs, with the exception of some designs in Transformers Animated, these were the most unique Transformers designs we have ever seen since the Bayverse films. And because the animated ones, they still kind of had a feel like the G1 Transformers, but the fact that the Prime versions of these characters were so different for the most part, that's what I really like, to see that Prime innovated so much and gave us brand new looks to all these Autobots and Decepticons, and just took so many cool new things that we saw in the Bayverse and did it right, and just trimmed all the really bad stuff, like, I don't know, just everything. Like, it took all the good things and got rid of the bad stuff, like, let's say, Bumblebee taking a piss on John Turturro, or Mark Wahlberg's underage daughter dating a 20-year-old man who happens to carry a copy of the Romeo and Juliet Laws for Texas in his wallet. Yeah, Michael Bay, you got kind of a little weird towards the end of the Bayverse series there, my dude. But anyway, yeah, with Transformers Prime, the main cast of Autobots was essentially very similar to that of Transformers Animated. Again, heavily inspired by the starting lineup of Autobots that we saw in Transformers, the first Bayverse movie, where we had Optimus, Ratchet, Ironhide, Bumblebee, Jazz. I'm sorry if I'm remembering more. It's been a few years since I've seen the first Bayverse film, but I'm pretty sure that was all of them. And then, so in Transformers Animated, we had our main 5 characters: Optimus, Bumblebee, Ratchet, Bulkhead, and Prowl. Now, for Transformers Prime, we keep the exact same cast of characters, with the exception of taking out Prowl, but all the characters, despite being the same characters, they're totally different as well. With starting off with Optimus, let's say, Prime Optimus is totally different from Animated Optimus, where Animated Optimus was a lot younger and inexperienced, where the title of Prime wasn't really like a honorary title, but just Optimus's like name, kind of like his last name, where he was just this rookie elite guard who just had to keep all his like ragtag misfit group of soldiers in line while going up against this overwhelming threat that was the Decepticons. Now with Transformers Prime Optimus, this Optimus is a lot older and tired. He's like a seasoned veteran who's like, well, he takes a lot more cues from Bayverse Optimus, and of course this is strengthened by, of course, Peter Cullen, the original voice of Optimus from the G1 cartoon, coming back to voice him, which was huge for Transformers fans, because this was the first time in over 30 years that Peter Cullen had voiced Optimus for a Transformers TV show. Now, granted, he was the voice of Optimus in the Bayverse movies, most notably at the time the first one and Revenge of the Fallen, which had been already released, but Peter Cullen never voiced Optimus in any Transformers cartoon after G1. Gary Chalk took over as the voice of him in Beast Wars and the Unicron trilogy, and then David Kaye voiced him in Animated. And of course, Peter Cullen came back to voice him in the Bayverse movies, but this was the first actual time that Peter Cullen came back to voice Optimus in a Transformers cartoon show. And to see having Peter Cullen's voice have changed in the 30 years between the G1 cartoon and Prime, it makes Optimus such a better character, in my opinion. Having Peter Cullen's much more gravelly tone, and it really sells the fact that Optimus is this million-year-old robot who's just tired and so goddamn tired of all this fighting, and it just fits with his character so well. And we're not going like the Bayverse route of Optimus, where he was like just this crazy fight-hungry robot. This one is a lot more of a lawful good type character who really wants to try to see the best in people. He's a lot more naive in that sense, kind of like Transformers Animated Optimus, but a lot more like intelligent, I guess, and more seasoned than Animated Optimus. And I think that really benefits this version of Optimus, especially with the fact that Peter Cullen, of all people, voices him, which is incredible. And while we'll be going over another character's voice actor before we actually start it, I want to introduce the rest of these voice actors as they're introduced in the show. So let's go ahead and just move on to the rest of the Autobot cast. Now moving on to the rest of Team Prime. So a lot, back when Transformers Prime was announced, it was announced about 5 months before it premiered at San Diego Comic-Con 2010. It was at this point when the whole cast of the show was announced and all that, and we got our main lineup of Autobots, and that was, of course, Optimus, Bumblebee, Bulkhead, Ratchet, and 2 new characters. Instead of having Prowl like we did in Transformers Animated, we now have RC and Cliffjumper, and those 2 characters were very, very hyped up, especially, of course, with Cliffjumper, who was a relatively minor character in the Transformers lore prior to that. Of course, Cliffjumper played a big part in the IW comics leading up to that time, and of course he had a pretty decent role in the G1 cartoon. But the biggest fact that Cliffjumper was now being put into the spotlight, that brought a lot of hype up for the show back when it was first announced, and of course, even more so the fact that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was announced to be the voice of Cliffjumper, which a lot of people were going to. But that actually serves as a very nice bait and switch, which I'll get into when we finally review episode 1 in just a few minutes. But going back one by these characters, with the exception of RC and Cliffjumper, who we'll talk about later, mostly RC though, Bumblebee, Bulkhead, and Ratchet, while they're the same characters that we saw make up Team Prime back in Animated, their characters are vastly different, with the exception of Ratchet. Ratchet, for the most part, though, is pretty much the same Ratchet as Animated Ratchet. He's like the tired, older bot of the team, but it kind of makes Prime Ratchet is a little bit more snarky than Animated Ratchet, and the fact that, in my opinion, Prime Ratchet is maybe a bit more capable than Animated Ratchet. Again, though, I haven't yet to see all of Transformers Animated, so I can't really speak for that. But Prime Ratchet, though, he seems to have a lot more wisdom to him than Animated Ratchet does. And while in Animated, Ratchet served as kind of like a mentor to Optimus, in Prime, Optimus and Ratchet's relationship is almost kind of like brothers in a way, that they both were together throughout the entirety of the war. And I think that that's something that's really cool to see that this version of Optimus and Ratchet share, where we had a mentor-student relationship in Animated. We now have kind of like a brothers-in-arms relationship between the two of them in Prime. I think that's a thing that really strengthens their bond in this show, and really makes like conversations between them and arguments even between them later on in the show with future episodes and seasons all that more interesting. Going on to Bulkhead, Bulkhead pretty much retains most of his personality and appearance from Transformers Animated. The fact that he's the giant, he's the bruiser of Team Prime. But the fact is that Prime Bulkhead is maybe a bit more aggressive and like punchy than Animated Bulkhead, where Animated Bulkhead is kind of more of a gentle giant-like character. He like just paints and just have a good time. Of course, having Bill Faberbacky, the voice of Patrick from SpongeBob, voice him helped that a lot. But now this new Bulkhead, man, while he still has that sort of like hesitance to fight, it's like Animated Bulkhead, Prime Bulkhead, though, is a lot less of that hesitance. He is always willing to dive headfirst into a fight, but in regards to his human, specifically with Miko, who we'll be talking about later on in this review, Bulkhead clearly has he has a lot deeper bonds with his fellow Autobots and human Guardians that he guards over compared to Animated Bulkhead. And I think that shows that while this Bulkhead looks very similar to Animated Bulkhead, Prime Bulkhead still is his own unique character. And I think that's one that that Kurtzman, Orky, and the rest of the Prime direct development team should be proud of. Now, moving on from Bulkhead, we come to Bumblebee. Now, Bumblebee is a lot different from Animated Bumblebee, where Animated Bumblebee was very spunky, he was snarky, sarcastic, and he was kind of very similar to basically an early version of Robots in Disguise, Sideswipe, and the fact that he was the rebel of the group. Prime Bumblebee is a lot more in line with G1 and Bayverse type Bumblebees, and that's not just because Prime Bumblebee can't speak like Bayverse Bumblebee. Prime Bumblebee is a lot more, I guess, naive. He's basically a lot like the little brother of Team Prime, and not just the fact that he's immature and all that, he's actually pretty, like, mature and all that compared to other Bumblebees, very similar to G1 Bumblebee, I feel, the more like it. He's not super fighty and snarky like animated in Bay vs. Bumblebees. He still retains some of, like, the combat expertise that Bay vs. Bumblebee had. But the fact that Prime Bumblebee just feels like a kid in a war, and I feel like that's what they were trying to go for, with Bumblebee, of course, being the designated kid appeal character throughout the entire Transformers series. And with this Bumblebee, it really shows that they have room for Bumblebee to grow, and we see this happen throughout the whole show, where he finally sets himself up to be this new leader by the time Prime ends and Robots in Disguise starts, where he's the main character now. But of course, that'll be a discussion I'll save for future videos when we go cover the rest of Transformers Prime, maybe a year or two from now. Who am I kidding? But yeah. Anyways, though, Prime Bumblebee though still fits, like, my analogy I made. If you remember back in my review of Transformers Animated, where I compared the main cast of Animated to the Teen Titans, where Optimus was Robin, Raven was Prowl, Bulkhead was Cyborg, and Bumblebee was Beast Boy. If Animated Bumblebee was the Teen Titans version of Beast Boy, I guess the best way I can put Prime Bumblebee is comparing him to the Young Justice version of Beast Boy. Let's go with that, because while he still contains, like, the little childish aspects of him, he's a lot more down to earth and serious than Teen Titans Beast Boy, where Young Justice Beast Boy, he could still crack a joke in him down, but he was a lot more serious than Teen Titans Beast Boy, and I feel like that's the best analogy I can really come up with if we're gonna keep up the Teen Titans and the Teen Titans comparison with this Team Prime. Now, finally, with RC. Now, RC is arguably the biggest departure from the original Team Prime roster we had in Animated. Where in Animated, our final character was Prowl, who was the ninja cop motorcycle, who was a totally different take on the character from any other Prowl we had seen before in Transformers universe. This time we have RC, who once again is a motorcycle like Prowl was, but again, she is a total departure from the G1 version of RC. Now, G1 RC, now while she wasn't exactly a girly girl per se, like many, like, girl characters were in, like, 80s, like, or just any cartoons of, like, the 80s, 90s, even some early 2000s cartoons, G1 RC was definitely a badass in her own right. She was just as good as any other Autobots, but she was still distinctly the girl Autobot. She was bright pink, she had the Princess Leia hairdo and everything. Like, she looked and basically felt like, oh yeah, okay, RC is the girl Autobot, that's what she's designated by. But Prime RC totally flips that on head. While in G1 RC we had the obvious feminine body, we had the bright pink color scheme, Prime RC has instead a very sleek dark blue color scheme. She's got a much more androgynous build, kind of, while still kind of mostly feminine, but still just not overtly feminine like G1 RC. She's a lot more sleeker and a lot more darker in both color and personality than G1 RC, and that's only further strengthened by the talent of her voice actress Sumli Montano, who does an amazing job of bringing RC to life. And also, just as we were comparing between Prime and G1 RC, the fact that even though Prime RC is mostly like a colored blue and she's a motorcycle now as opposed to a sports car like G1 RC was, Prime RC still has flashes of pink on her body, but not in an overt way that's more feminine like G1 RC, and instead have her keep the slick dark blue color scheme that she has in Prime, while still having a little bit of pink to, like, kind of pay homage to her origins with the pink G1 version of her that most Transformers fans know her by. However, despite being a completely different character, Prime RC does also share a lot of similarities with Animated Prowl, and the fact that they're both basically the ninja stealth experts of both their respective Team Primes. They both turn into motorcycles, they're both kind of the loners of the group, and they both have a darker side to them. While on the bright side, though, Animated Prowl is a little more lighter than Prime RC, but the fact still stands that Prime RC was really heavily inspired by Animated Prowl. And again, if we're going back to the Teen Titans analogy that I said back in my anime review, Prime RC is totally the Raven of the Prime version of Team Prime. Not to go with a double Prime there, but it basically, RC is without a doubt the Raven of the Prime version of Team Prime. Sumi Montano does a great job of voicing her as one of Sumili Montano's first like real voice acting roles, as far as I know, like big voice acting roles. For all you Telltale fans though, you may recognize her from two distinct roles in some of Telltale's later games. Distinctly, she took over Curzia Bajos in Batman the Enemy Within as the voice of Renee Montoya, with Curzia Bajos, who previously voiced her in Season 1. And her, in that game, her Montoya voice is very similar to her RC voice, which I picked up on in my Let's Play of that game. But unbeknownst to probably most of you, she also voiced Mantis in Guardians of the Galaxy, the Telltale series, which completely blew me away when I first played it. I'm like, there's no way RC, you have the girl who voiced RC go to voice Mantis, who's such a happy-go-lucky character. Like, here, have like a clip of Mantis from Guardians of the Galaxy, compare that with RC, and tell me they're the same voice actress. You cannot tell me they're the same voice actress. And that just stands as another testament to how awesome Sumili Montano is as both RC and Mantis here.
Yes, you should be proud of freeing me. I no longer have to stare into the infinite crushing darkness. It was so boring.
How could you possibly know how he feels?
I can show you, angry lady. Oh, no. Never mind.
What you need to understand is that I don't want a bunch of crazy talking vehicles following me around trying to get me killed.
Look, Jack, is it? Your personal safety is exactly why Optimus Prime has requested your presence.
Wait, Optimus who?
You may be in danger because you are one of the few, one of the only who have ever seen us.
Like I said, it's just awesome. I should also mention that Sumili Montano has gone on to do a lot of big stuff lately. One you probably everyone knows her for most likely now is the voice of Yuna in the most recent Ghost of Tsushima game that just came out a few months ago. And while I personally haven't played the game, I've watched a few Let's Plays of it, and I gotta say, Sumili Montano absolutely killed it as Yuna, who, for all intents and purposes, is the second main character of Ghost of Tsushima, and to see her take on such a big role like that in the game, I think is really cool to see how far she's come since voicing RC in this show. But yeah, anyway though, I feel like we've talked enough about the design feel of this, like how this show came to be. I mean, we've already gone like 20 minutes into this video, and we haven't even actually reviewed the episodes yet. So I think, without further ado, we're gonna formally begin our review of Transformers Prime's first two episodes, starting with episode 1 of season 1, Darkness Rising Part 1. So starting our review with episode 1, Darkness Rising Part 1, we start off on a simple country road in Jasper, Nevada, which is, of course, the main setting of Transformers Prime at dawn. We see a distinct red muscle car with ornate hood ornaments on the front, cruising down the road as we hear the driver talk to another person who are revealed eventually to be Cliffjumper and RC. And the bond that the way Cliffjumper and RC talk to each other in this episode, despite how little we see them interact in this episode, it already establishes like a real strong bond between the two, and it's one that RC will bring up a lot more throughout the series, whether it's through flashback episodes or just conversations with other characters throughout the show. And it's really strengthened by just how well Sumili Montano and Dwayne Johnson work in this scene. Like, honestly, like Dwayne Johnson as Cliffjumper was really good casting, despite how short we have him for in this episode. But of course, we get a little more exposition throughout this conversation as it basically sets up the fact that the Autobots have basically been on Earth for a few years now, and there have been no signs of the Decepticons yet on Earth. Now, this sort of premise of kind of a Cold War between the Autobots and Decepticons, it's something cool because even though it's not necessarily new to the Transformers universe, this is the first time we're actually seeing it play out in a Transformers cartoon. Yes, the first Bayverse movie kind of set this up, and that was the premise of the first one, with Bumblebee sort of acting as like a sleeper agent for the Autobots on Earth, and then him signaling Optimus and the rest of the team to come. But we never really saw that in any other Transformers cartoon. The only other time where we've seen like a Cold War scenario between the Autobots and Decepticons was all the way back in the very first IDW comics, way before More Than Meets the Eye, Robots in the Sky is Still All One, and all that good stuff. The very first IDW comic for Transformers was a short series called Infiltration, and that comic sort of started this whole infiltration, well, for lack of better terms, storyline for that the Autobots and Decepticons were kind of just like having their just sending small infiltration squads of Autobots and Decepticons onto random planets, with Earth included, just to try and, like, doing, like, little strike team missions or just capture Energon outposts and stuff like that. So it kind of sets that, it's kind of cool to finally see that play out in a Transformers cartoon, even though we've had it happen in both the movies and the comics, which again further strengthens just how much Transformers Prime was inspired by the Bayverse movies, even more so than animated. As Cliffjumper is talking to RC, we see him heading towards what appears to be a very large Energon deposit that interrupts both his and RC's conversation, and just as he's about to go harvest some for Optimus and the rest of the Autobots, he's interrupted by a Decepticon warship coming down, dropping a bunch of Viacons to ambush him. Now, this is also, again, another big thing that happened exclusively in Transformers Prime that we've never seen, like, outside of, like, the War for Cybertron video game, which came out just a few months prior to this show coming out. We never actually saw, like, the Decepticons have, like, a bunch of, like, a faceless army, per se. Like, in the G1 cartoons, in animated, in Beast Wars, and all that stuff, the Decepticons, you always had your distinct Decepticons. You had Megatron, Starscream, Soundwave, and all your other bunch of Decepticons going against your Autobots, but you never really had Decepticons, like, actually be an army with a bunch of faceless soldiers, and it's really cool to see that Transformers Prime is going with that extra mile and just having, instead of just having the Autobots constantly go up against a distinct series of Decepticons, you also have them dealing against, like, this huge, almost overwhelmingly large army of Viacons, and it really sets that up, the tone that these Decepticons don't mess around in this first episode, because when you see Cliffjumper come down getting ready to fight these guys, you're thinking, okay, well, like, this, no, isn't knowing that, like, this is the first episode, we're gonna see just Cliffjumper take out a lot of these guys, then maybe we'll have someone like Starscream or Megatron come down and be more of a fair fight for him, but no, these Viacons absolutely kick Cliffjumper's ass, for a lack of better terms, and it is really shocking to see that such, like, that even, like, these faceless, no-name Viacons are as almost as equal of a threat, if not just a bit less than the main Decepticons of this show. They absolutely wreck Cliffjumper for the most part of this fight. They end up knocking him into the pit, knocking one of his horns off, and Cliffjumper manages to get the upper hand towards the end of the fight, but not before the Decepticon warship from above blows up the entire Energon, like, vein, whatever, harvest spot, and basically kills all the Viacons there, and really injures Cliffjumper. Then 2 more Viacons come down to pick up Cliffjumper and take him captured on the ship. And then it's at this point when Cliffjumper is badly injured and taken onto the ship that we get our first look at our first proper Decepticon in Transformers Prime. And who else to be the first Decepticon shown in Transformers Prime than Starscream? And by God, do I love Transformers Prime Starscream so much, because just like nearly every other character in Transformers Prime, Prime Starscream is such a big departure from every other version of Starscream that we've ever come before him. Like, this Starscream, he is nothing like, well, he does have a few, like, key distinct a bit like personality traits that other Starscreams before him have had, but Prime Starscream is just a whole nother level, and I could just go on a whole tangent right now, make a whole video essay about why I love Prime Starscream, and why, aside from IDW Starscream, Prime Starscream is without a doubt my favorite interpretation of the character across any cartoon or movie. I just love him so much. And it's just because the fact that, unlike every other Starscream, was mostly just played for laughs. He was like the sniveling second in command who just hated Megatron and was always trying to, like, find ways to take him out and take over Decepticons. We had this in animated G1, to a bit the Bayverse movies, but all of them just were kind of played for laughs. Those Starscreams were kind of seen as incompetent, and while they were maybe threatening at times, they, again, just incompetent and played for laughs. But this Starscream, he's dark, super dark, he's super threatening, and actually a competent Decepticon who is really scary. Granted, he does have his few, like, moments of quirkiness like previous Starscreams before him, but there's just so much, and the fact his design is nothing like other Starscreams that have come before him, where you have the distinct red, white, and blue color scheme with the very blocky design. This Starscream is nothing like that. This Starscream, I mean, god damn, this Starscream is just so perfect, because every other Starscream, you see him as just this incompetent fool. This one, you see he's dark, he's sleek, he's just perfect in every single way and oddly attractive, and I love it. Like, you honestly, like, this is a Starscream that people should be scared of, and I like that Starscream actually has a fear factor to him, that no one ever really takes Starscream seriously, and that's only further strengthened by just how awesome his voice actor Steve Blum does it. And honestly, Steve Blum as Starscream is without a doubt the definitive voice for Starscream. And whenever I think of Starscream, I can't think of him without being voiced by Steve Blum. Now, in case for whatever reason you're just unaware of all the stuff Steve Blum has done, because he is a god in terms of voice acting, he has done a lot of great stuff over the years. Some of my personal favorites of his include him as Tank Dempsey in the Call of Duty Zombie series. He did Grayson Hunt in Bulletstorm, and also he was the voice of Orochimaru in the Naruto series, which his Starscream voice is heavily inspired by that. And having rewatched Naruto a few months ago, I can totally see where he got his Starscream voice from, and it's great. His Starscream voice is just so good, and I got to meet him at New York Comic Con 2 years ago, and it was just so good to hear him do his Starscream voice for me. I absolutely loved seeing him and just freaking out over, because I gotta stop talking about Starscream right now, because honestly, this whole video would just be about me just praising Prime Starscream for how awesome he is, and I love it. But anyway, I gotta get back to this review. So anyway, Starscream comes down, or Cliffjumper is brought to Starscream, who is again in charge of the Decepticons on Earth, very similar to animated Starscream, when he was the first Decepticon we saw in Transformers Animated, and even back to G1 where Starscream was the first Decepticon shown in then. So it's nice to see like a continuing motif that Starscream's always been the first real Decepticon that we've seen in each Transformers show. Even with Cyberverse now, I mean, yes, we had Thundercracker and Nova Storm technically, but Starscream was the first real main Decepticon we saw in Cyberverse, and to see Prime kind of inspired that trend going forward with Cyberverse makes me really happy. So, of course, Starscream goes to interrogate Cliffjumper, trying to get him to tell him where the rest of the Autobots are, and of course Cliffjumper refuses. It's really dark to see how this goes, because Starscream looks totally intimidating in this, just looking down at Cliffjumper, who's all beat up, and Cliffjumper in this, I should remind you, is visibly just totally wrecked. He's actually bleeding and coughing up blue energon, which when I first saw this, I'm like, whoa, this was a Y7 rated show, and they showed this? Like, coming from a guy whose only, like, experience with a dark cartoon was the Clone Wars, to show this kind of stuff in a cartoon 10 years ago? Like, goddamn, Hasbro. I can see why you wanted to get back to dark stuff with Cyberverse, because, man, this was awesome to see. Now, honest, when you first watch this, probably, you're thinking, oh, well, yeah, Starscream's torturing Cliffjumper here, just private information. Cliffjumper looks pretty beat up, but don't worry, like, he's a main character. Hasbro typed him up for so many months leading up to Transformers Prime's premiere. I'm sure, like, nothing bad's gonna happen to him, right? I mean, like, here, just watch this clip, and we'll see. I'm sure Cliffjumper's gonna be fine.
Scream. It's been a while. So, where's your master?
Never mind him. I am my own master. Any more questions?
Oh. Well, I guess I should have put up a little spoiler warning at the start of this video, huh? But yeah, Hasbro really went there, and not even within the first 5 minutes of the episode have they already killed off a main character. And Dwayne Johnson, no less. You have Starscream just really went ahead and offed Cliffjumper within the first 5 minutes of the first episode. And in a pretty graphic way, too, for a kid's show. You have him just shove his claw hand right into his chest to the point where you have actual energon pulling out of his chest onto the floor and on Starscream's hand. Like, damn, Hasbro, you're gonna give kids nightmares that way, but I don't care. I love it. And when I saw this, I was genuinely shocked. As someone who didn't see this coming, I thought for sure, oh, Cliff Jumper's gonna be taken prisoner. Then Optimus, everyone's gonna rescue him, and then he'll live on. Maybe he'll die later in the show, but not gonna die today. But oh, look at that! Starscream went ahead and just offed him, just like a certain buff lady bashed in the head of a certain beloved character from a zombie sequel game that came out earlier this year. In fact,
Get up. Fucking get up. Please stop. Please don't shoot. No, please get up.
oh, guess I should have put a spoiler for The Last of Us 2 as well, huh? So it's not too long after Starscream basically murders Cliff Jumper, which is a fact that Starscream will not shut up about for the remainder of this series, by the way, is that after that, RC gets worried that after Cliff Jumper's signal goes missing, that she informs Optimus to basically just get the whole group, Autobot group, to go after Cliff Jumper's last known location. So Optimus, once again voiced by Peter Cullen, after 30 years, rounds up RC, Ratchet, Bumblebee, and Bulkhead, and they all converge from the different corners of the world that they're at to go to the crater and go try to find Cliff Jumper. So they all arrive there, and it's also at this point where we get introduced to the rest of their these characters' voice actors. So we start off with Bulkhead, who is voiced by none other than Kevin Michael Richardson, replacing Bill Faberbacky from Transformers Animated. Kevin Michael Richardson does a great job at Bulkhead, and definitely helps set the much gruffer tone that this Bulkhead has compared to Animated, who is more of a gentle giant, like I stated before. Kevin Michael Richardson absolutely nails it as Bulkhead, and it shows based on his previous work in other cartoons. Most notably, you'll probably recognize him as the voice of Shredder in the 2012 version of Teenage Ninja Turtles, Antari in Super Robot Monkey Team Hyperforce Go, or even Trigon in Teen Titans and its sequel series, Teen Titans Go. All those, Kevin Michael Richardson absolutely killed it in those roles, and to see him now going to Bulkhead in more of a protagonist role, very similar to Antari, but in the fact that from Super Robot Monkey Team, but the fact that Bulkhead is a lot more aggressive, and I think Kevin Michael Richardson does an absolute baller of a job voicing Bulkhead, and really gives him that rough and like aggressive tone that Bulkhead needs for this character. And then we cut over to Ratchet, who is no longer voiced by Corey Burton like in Transformers Animated, but is instead voiced by Jeffrey Combs from the Animator movies, or the Reanimator movies, I should say, which was really shocking to me as someone who really enjoyed Reanimator films, just like watching them on, like, when I ended up watching like one or two of them during like an AMC Halloween marathon while waiting for like a season of Walking Dead. Jeffrey Combs absolutely nails it as Ratchet, and kind of channels Corey Burton's essence as the character as a very tired medic. And but Jeffrey Combs absolutely goes ham on this role compared to Corey Burton, in my opinion, just cranking the sass up to 11, and he can get oddly serious at times like that too, which I really like about Jeffrey Combs as Ratchet. So when Ratchet tries to go and scan for Cliff Jumper's signal, he finds that, big surprise, Cliff Jumper's got the big dead now, and so when RC finds his horn, that pretty much just confirms that Cliff Jumper's dead, so they all decide to go ahead and head back to their base to mourn him, essentially. It's also not too long after the Autobots find out that Cliff Jumper has died that we cut back to Starscream and the rest of the Decepticons, and we also get our first look at another returning Decepticon, and that is Soundwave, in this when he comes to inform Starscream of a transmission picked up between RC shortly before Cliff Jumper died. And I absolutely, just like Starscream, I absolutely love Soundwave's design in Transformers Prime, because it's such a radical departure from any other Soundwave we've seen before, with the exception of the Bayverse version of Soundwave. And even takes some cues from the Bayverse version of Soundwave, and the fact that his his design is kind of similar to that. Not the fact that he doesn't have a face and all that, but just because of the fact that he's kind of more of a piece of surveillance. Well, G1 Soundwave, and to my knowledge, I think Animated Soundwave 2 were just boomboxes. Bayverse Soundwave was a big satellite. And now, Prime Soundwave is, well, every Soundwave was kind of just like this bulky, like, intimidating figure. Prime Soundwave is a lot more thinner and sleeker than other Soundwaves. And the fact that he turned into like a UAV drone straight out of Call of Duty makes sense, though, because you're taking Soundwave, who is this staple character in the Transformers franchise, but basically modernizing him for the 2010s. And I think Hasbro, Polygon Pictures, Kurtzman, Orky, whoever was in charge of the designs for Transformers Prime, they knocked it right out of the park in making Soundwave feel unique compared to other sounds. And that's, again, another thing I love so much about Transformers Prime, that for the most part, every character in Transformers Prime feels so different compared to other versions of those characters. And it also helps the fact that this is another Soundwave that we don't hear speak at all. Now, normally, we're used to hearing Frank Welker voice Soundwave in his various robotic voice, but this Soundwave doesn't talk at all. But it's not like Soundwave, or Bumblebee, in the sense that he doesn't have a voice box. Prime Soundwave just doesn't like to talk, and it's really cool seeing, like, how, Soundwave gets his, interacts with other Decepticons and such by just having a blank face that just plays actual sound waves of recordings made by other people to try and get his points across. So, like, sometimes when he's talking to people, he'll play audio back from other characters. But the cool thing is that, let's say he talks to Starscream by using a recording of Megatron's voice. When Megatron talks, it's re-recorded, it sounds just like Megatron, but it just has the faintest bit of the sound wave filter that we know from G1, and I think that is so cool that Soundwave, even though he's so different compared to other Soundwaves, he still retains bits and pieces of his G1 origin, and kudos to the Transformers Prime development team for doing that. So anyway, yeah, after Soundwave comes in and shows Starscream that Cliffjumper was talking to RC before he was captured and killed by Starscream, Starscream decides to go ahead and send a few Viacons to chase after RC next, and so he can capture and kill her next. Now, it's really at this, like, makeshift funeral for Cliffjumper that Optimus is holding with all the Autobots on top of the base that really sets up RC's character going forward, because while it's not really revealed in this one episode, or even episode 2, just how much Cliffjumper meant to RC, we can see it still clearly pains her, but she's not, like, as affected by it as you think she would be. Because we see, like, she kind of, like, just only seems, like, angrier right now. She just seems, like, ready to go out and, like, kill the Decepticons. Do it. Again, like a certain heroine from a zombie survival game that just came out a few months ago. Hint, hint. Again, not saying anything, just leaving it at that. Don't want to cause any more drama. But RC just decides after, like, just putting Cliffjumper's wearing a little memorial site on top of the base, RC decides to go out for a little, like, Decepticon patrol, much to the chagrin of Optimus and the rest of the team, but Bumblebee wants to go ahead and go after her, but Optimus says that RC needs the space, and it's at this time we then get introduced to our first main human character of this show. So after RC leaves, we get introduced to our first human, Jack Darby, who is essentially, for lack of better terms, the Sam Witwicky or the Russell of this show, and Jack is an absolutely great human character in my opinion. He's not like, he's in my opinion, he's definitely one of the best humans that we've seen in a Transformers cartoon, though if I had to say, like, who's the best human of any Transformers, like, piece of media, I would have to give that to either Charlie in the Bumblebee movie or Verity Carlo from the IDW comics. Both of them were fantastic, but Jack is arguably one of, if not the best human character in any Transformers cartoon. Like, honestly, he's really good, and the fact that, like, he's not super dramatic like Sam Witwicky was in the Bayverse films, or just like a kind of like an annoyance like Spike was in the G1 cartoon. Sorry was pretty good and animated too, but again, I haven't seen a lot of animated to actually provide a solid statement on, like, opinion on what I think of Sorry. So Jack is arguably my favorite of the humans in any Transformers cartoon, and that's further strengthened by the work of his voice actor Josh Keaton, who has done tons of stuff. You'll probably recognize him mostly as the voice of Spider-Man in tons of different stuff, whether it be the Spectacular Spider-Man cartoon or the Spider-Man Edge of Time video game, or you may also recognize him as the voice of Shiro in the Netflix series Voltron Legendary Defender, which I absolutely loved his role as Shiro in that. He did a great job in that. So Jack is essentially just the kind of the surrogate character for the audience. He's just a regular 16-year-old boy who's working a dead-end job at a fast food restaurant, just trying to make ends meet, and we kind of get a nice little introduction of just how his life is going. And it's at this point when RC is also at his fast food place, like, doing patrols, and we get this really fun moment of Jack fantasizing about one day owning RC and riding her, which sounds really wrong out of context. But we're not gonna have any of the weird shit from the Babe Ruth movies, like with Shia LaBeouf and Megan Fox making out on top of Bumblebee. I still can't believe that actually happened in the Babe Ruth movies. Like, just going back, just thinking about that stuff out loud says, like, wow, that was really, really messed up when the more I think about it. But, yeah, anyway, and it doesn't help the fact that I actually voiced Jack in a parody, in a very Dragon Ball Z abridged type video called TFP Parodied. It was meant to be basically just a DBZ abridged, but for Transformers Prime. I voiced Jack in the pilot episode, and I was going to voice Smokescreen when we got to season 2, but unfortunately, we never actually got anywhere other than the pilot episode. The pilot episode's still on YouTube if you want to go ahead and watch it for whatever cringy reason and hear me voice Jack and be oddly sexual with RC. So I'll go ahead and just link that video in the description below, or maybe put a little card on it if you want to go ahead and watch that mess for yourself. So it's at this point when Jack is just basically drooling over RC, for lack of better terms, that two of his friends from high school end up just talking to him, and it's at this point when two Viacons spot RC and try to attack her, but Jack, who's on top of her at the moment, gets taken away by RC and is basically chased by the Viacons all the way through the town. Eventually they get to an alleyway where RC ditches Jack to try and lose the Viacons, but one of them ends up going after Jack, so RC has to go back after her. And it's really cool to see, again, this Cold War robots in disguise feel to it that's very similar of the Bayverse film, especially with the first fight between Bumblebee and Blackout. Not Bumblebee, but Bumblebee and Barricade in the first Bayverse film, when Sam first gets Bumblebee. It's very similar. It has a very similar feel to that one, and it's really cool when RC is with Jack and they're riding on the highway, being chased by the Viacons, and as she jumps down into a storm drain, she ends up having Bumblebee come help her for backup, and it's really cool to just see how Autobots and Decepticons fight each other in sort of a undercover aesthetic when they're still trying to keep a relatively low profile against other humans. So it's not too long after RC and Jack run away from the Viacons and jump off the highway that we get introduced to our second main human character, and that is Raphael, or Raph, as everyone calls him in the show. And Raph, again, I like Raph as a character, but I'm not gonna lie, it's just this one con. I feel like his introduction here feels a little forced, maybe? Or just feels kind of odd. It starts with basically, it has a cool transition, though. It starts with, Bumblebee taking, in his alt mode, taking a drift into the camera, and when we come back, we see what looks to be Bumblebee continuing that drifting turn, that hard turn, but it actually just turns out to be Raph playing in the storm drain with an RC car that just happens to be Bumblebee's alt mode, and it's stuff like this that it's so little, but it's such a cool idea for a transition, because you don't immediately recognize that it's shifted from Bumblebee to just a toy car, but it's a small thing like that I really like. But anyway, Raph as a character I think is really cool, and I like him as a character, just have him be the techie guy of all the humans in Team Prime. That each character in Humans, when we get to Miko later, each of them kind of represent a staple in Humans. We have Jack representing basically the Sam/Verity of the series. We have Raph representing one of Spike's nerdy friends in the G1 cartoon, and of course we have Miko, who's kind of like a new version of Sorry from Transformers Animated. And so it's really cool to see all these humans have distinct personality traits and see how they all take inspiration from various other humans throughout the Transformers series, both the movies, the comics, and the other previous cartoons. So Raph's just playing in the storm drain for whatever reason, and I guess maybe just Hasbro Studios wanted to try and show that Raph is just a lonely kid and all that. But I'm sorry, but what 12-year-old in their right mind would go to a storm drain just to play, or whose parents would allow? I don't know, if just I'm in the person who's thinking this, because I had a smother mother who had to know everything I was doing, and I know for damn sure she would not let me go play in a storm drain. But I don't know, go ahead and just tell me what you think about that in the comments. So of course Raph is just playing when he ends up spotting Jack in RC being chased by the Viacons, and he's just in total awe of this when RC throws Jack off next to Raph, and she ends up fighting the Decepticons for a little bit by herself until Bumblebee comes to help him. And now Raph is actually voiced by Andy Pessoa, who was a fairly new voice actor. I think he's done a few more things since Transformers Prime, but I haven't really kept up with his credits lately. And it's really cool to see how Andy Pessoa evolves as Raph as the series goes on, because he starts off, I think he was like fairly young, like he was only about maybe 9 to 10 years old, maybe around Raph's actual age of like 11 or 12 when he started voicing him in Transformers Prime. But obviously Transformers Prime went on for 4 years, all the way to 2013, so his voice gets considerably deeper as the show goes on. And it even helps a bit with in the show when Raph becomes more mature as the series goes on, and I can talk about that more when we get down to further those episodes in future in reviews later in years to come, but I'll just leave it like that from now. So it's really cool, this fight that Bumblebee and RC get into fight all these off these Viacons, and it's really cool how the choreography just feels very, very Bayverse inspired, that these Autobot Decepticons, they are not pulling their punches, and it's not something like you would expect to see, like if we think about like fights in Robots in Disguise where they kind of just do some light punches, and if like a character gets seriously hit, it kind of just gets centered with a white flash, and then just shows the character that's being hit just like gets knocked back. We don't actually see any contact with any of the punches, with a few exceptions, Robots in Disguise. The same thing happened with Cyberverse, but Cyberverse actually eased up on that a bit and wasn't afraid to show a little more violent combat. Prime just goes all out with this. Like, you see actual punches connecting. Feel like they have real force to them, especially in one point when Bumblebee ends up, like, when he first ends up punching like a Viacon like hard enough in the face, like you can actually see like flecks of paint coming right off his face, and it's stuff like that that really makes me happy to see just like how many risks Hasbro did with this and tried to cater to a more older audience than they were used to with their Transformers cartoons. And I know animated had gotten dark in some points, but nothing like this before, and I'm glad that they did that. So far, it seems like Bumblebee and RC have the upper hand in the fight, but just like Cliffjumper did with his fight, the Viacons just overwhelm Bumblebee and RC, and it's really, really worrying to see how easily these faceless grunts can handle Autobots, like the main Autobots, and it's just, I think that's another thing that shows just how big of a threat the Decepticons are in this. So Raph and Jack managed to get away by running out into a storm drain, and they just kind of disappear from the plot for a few minutes after this, while RC and Bumblebee leave to go fight the Decepticons, and then they're getting overwhelmed before Bulkhead suddenly comes in, and Bulkhead's just designed. I know I talked about this earlier when he was introduced alongside Ratchet, but I just love like how imposing Bulkhead is compared to Bumblebee and RC, especially the fact that his alt mode is very, very similar to his alt mode from Transformers Anime. In fact, it's like a big souped up military grade like Hummer, kind of like that, and his presence alone is just enough to get the Viacons just to go running. And after that, they decide Bumblebee, Bulkhead, and RC decide to head back to base and inform Optimus and Ratchet about what happens. So once Bulkhead, RC, and Bumblebee get back to base, they tell Optimus about what happened with Jack and Raph seeing them when they were fighting all the Decepticons. And so Optimus believes that since Jack and Raph saw them, they believe the Decepticons might be coming after them and might use them to be like to be like bargaining chips and all that. So he has the three of them go basically escort Jack and Raph away, so that they can explain the situation to them. And we get this really funny scene. It cuts to the next day when Raph and Jack are seeing each other after school, like just trying to process what exactly just happened between them yesterday. And it's at this point when Bumblebee just pulls up to Raph and basically in the car mode motions for him to get it in. And it's really cool now because I should probably mention this too, that at this point, while just like Bayverse Bumblebee, Prime Bumblebee doesn't speak, it's different from Bayverse Bumblebee and even Cyberverse Bumblebee in the fact that he doesn't talk through like radio quips like those Bumblebees do, but instead just talks in a more, I guess, generic series of like beeps and boops, which I guess they did that to kind of simplify it, and they didn't want to run into problems with other voice actors just having to like voice Bumblebee, which I understand, but it makes this Bumblebee just feel all the more unique, and it plays a bit more into the bond he has with Raph, with Raph being the only one actually able to understand Bumblebee out of all the other humans. So when Bumblebee tells Raph to get in and Raph explains this to Jack, Jack just totally confused because that, first off, how Raph can understand B, which unfortunately the show never really explains, which I'm not going to say that's a con of this episode because that's something the whole series doesn't explain, but yeah, it is kind of frustrating to understand why Raph might never understand why Raph understands Bumblebee's beeps and boops, but I guess we can just chalk it up to the fact that since he's a really techie kid, maybe Bumblebee's speaking in some kind of like robot Morse code or something like that Raph recognizes. I don't know, I'm just reaching here, but clearly I think Raph could have Raph could have done with a few more of those after school PSAs about never getting in a car with strangers after school, but because he just goes ahead and jumps into Bumblebee without no concern whatsoever and just drives off, leaving him alone. And then it's at this point that RC is there as well, being sketched by Miko, who we'll see more of later on in this episode. But she just seems to be really into drawing RC, and we get a nice little Easter egg here when Miko is drawing RC, and we get a little call from her foster parents where we hear I think like her ringtone is actually like, I could have sworn that the ringtone that she uses is a song from like it's a copyrighted song from the Transformers, the Bayverse movies, and I think that it's stuff like that. It's those small things that they actually have like take nods to other Transformers series. And well, I know the song that plays on Miko's phone, it wasn't like made for the Transformers movie. The fact that they included it in, I think it was like the first one soundtrack or Revenge of the Fallen soundtrack, the fact that they do that, I think that was really funny. And so while she's busy talking to her foster parents, RC comes and picks up Jack, to having him picked up as well. And it's at this point when RC and Bumblebee drop the two of them off in an alley to try and explain that they need to go see Optimus. And it's, again, we have a great series of funny conversations between RC and Jack here that's only made better by just how well Josh Keaton and Sumali Montano play the characters. It's just great, and the chemistry between them works really well. But as they're arguing, Miko just happens to have followed Jack and RC as all the way there, which she is totally instead of just terrified like Raph and Jack were, she's just loving the fact that, of course, basically her favorite kaiju show or whatever Japanese anime Gundam stuff that she's into is real, and basically reveals herself, so RC has to take her as well. So the three of them now head to back to the base, where we get it's cool to see, because at this point we've only seen the Autobot base in terms of like the size of the Autobots, but to see how massive it is compared to Jack, Miko, and Raph is just absolutely, it takes like a much broader scale. And this scene right here where Optimus introduces himself to the three kids, honestly, it feels like straight out of the Bayverse films more than anything. Like, honestly, you could compare this straight up to when Optimus reveals himself to Shia LaBeouf and Megan Fox in the first Bayverse film, and it feels so similar, especially with the little speech that Optimus gives Jack, Miko, and Raph here compared to the one he gives to Sam and Michaela in the first Bayverse film. I might actually play them side by side right here, if just to make my point across.
We are autonomous robotic organisms from the planet Cybertron, also known as Autobots.
Why are you here?
To protect your planet from the Decepticons. My name is Optimus Prime. We are autonomous robotic organisms from the planet Cybertron, but you can call us Autobots for short.
Autobots. So it's at this point, after all the Autobots arrive, that Optimus basically just explains the situation of why they're on Earth to Jack, Miko, and Raph. And it's cool seeing that we have this sort of it is a little bit heavy on the exposition in my opinion, but of course, since it's a brand new continuity, that's to be expected, even though Hasbro for some reason wanted this to be a sequel to the War for Cybertron video game that just came out a few months prior, but it just in my opinion, doesn't really work as a sequel to War for Cybertron. Just feels better as its own continuity. And so Optimus, after finishing explaining his story, explains that Megatron is the leader of Decepticons, and that if the Decepticons are now on Earth, that means Megatron is not too far behind them. We, of course, jump to the end of this episode when Soundwave picks up a transmission from Megatron, signaling his return, and so Starscream has Soundwave start up the space bridge for Megatron to return, and Megatron's design is, again, I cannot stress this enough, everyone in this show feels heavily Bayverse inspired, and that's no exception with Megatron, who feels like a cross between his animated design and his Bayverse design. The fact that he's more, unlike his animated and G1 designs, which are very blocky, and he has the distinct bucket head, Prime Megatron is a lot sleeker and curvier than other Megatrons. I don't mean that in like a weird way, but like honestly, like just seeing like how that's basically with every character in this, where every other Transformers show, they mostly had the characters very blocky, very standard 80s inspired. Prime just made everyone really curvy for some reason, and I don't know why, but it works really well. And so the fact that like Prime's Megatron's design, it feels like his armor is less bulky and kind of just actually his body, it feels a lot more genuine. And even though we only hear one line of him at the end of this episode, having Frank Welker come back to voice Megatron was such a big thing for Transformers fans, especially because unlike Peter Cullen, who had at least voiced Optimus in the Bayverse films before coming back to voice Optimus, Frank Welker had never voiced Megatron in another Transformers property since the G1 cartoon. He, of course, voiced him in a few, like, spin-off things or parodies, like in Robot Chicken and all that, just for fun. But this is the first time since the original G1 cartoon 30 years prior that Frank Welker had come back to voice Megatron. And man, just like Peter Cullen with Optimus, Frank Welker's age only made his Megatron voice much better. And it just helps because it's just so good to see Frank Welker's Megatron again. And Frank Welker's take on Prime Megatron is honestly the definitive Megatron voice, in my opinion. He just absolutely knocks out of the park, and no disrespect to the other voice actors. I think Corey Burden did a great job as him in Transformers Animated, and even David Kay did a great job in the Unicron trilogy and Beast Wars. But to see Frank Welker, the OG Megatron, return for Transformers Prime, it just helps the feeling that the show is basically a love letter to the original G1 cartoon, just like Transformers Animated was. And yeah, it's just great because unlike Peter Cullen, who actually voiced in Bayverse films, Frank Welker never voiced Megatron in the Bayverse films. He was instead voiced by Hugo Weaving in the first 3 Bayverse films, though Frank Welker would return to voice Megatron in the last 2 and replace Hugo Weaving. But at this point, though, this would be the first time in nearly 30 years that Frank Welker got to voice Megatron officially in a Transformers property, and it's absolutely great to see him again as basically the big cliffhanger ending for this episode. And then that brings us into episode 2, Darkness Rising Part 2, which premiered right after episode 1 did on November 26th. So this episode starts off basically exactly where episode 1 left off, with Megatron arriving on Earth after a 3-year like leave where he went to go find Dark Energon. So Starscream explains to Megatron what's been happening since he left Earth 3 years ago, and shows off this big Energon mine that he has been having all the Viacons mine in since Megatron left. And it's at this point that Megatron shows off that he has uncovered a large source of Dark Energon during his 3 years away, and basically explains that Dark Energon is a special kind of Energon that is meant to basically be the blood of Unicron, and explains that it has the properties to revive the dead. And we get a really darkly funny line here where Starscream doesn't believe that the Dark Energon can actually revive the dead, so Megatron just proposes that he just lets Starscream kill himself so Megatron can revive him with a Dark Energon. And it's really dark, but it works in such like a funny way, because it really shows just how much of a dry sense of humor Megatron has, and that's only further strengthened by just how well Frank Welker delivers the line. So after Starscream gets visibly, like, uncomfortable with the fact that Megatron's just asking Starscream to kill himself, Starscream instead proposes that they use, Cliffjumper's body to test the Dark Energon instead, which Megatron goes ahead and does. We then cut back to the Autobot headquarters shortly after the end of episode 1, where Optimus finished explaining, like, what the whole history of the Autobots and Decepticons to Jack, Miku, and Raph. And then he basically finishes by explaining to them that because the Decepticons have seen them now, they're most likely going to be in danger, so they have to be placed under Autobot care until the Decepticons are defeated, which, while Miko is loving it and Raph doesn't seem to mind it, Jack feels a little on edge with it. But before they can argue more, their proximity sensor goes off, showing that the Agent Fowler is coming. And Agent Fowler is, of course, basically Team Prime's liaison to the human military, the human military has been basically helping the Autobots in their fight against Decepticons, which is really cool. Again, very similar to the IDW comics later runs. Not much infiltration, but the later bits before Robots in Disguise and more meets the eye, similar to the All Hail Megatron storyline, the Transformers 2009 storyline, and so on. So it's at this point where we meet Agent Fowler, who I believe is also another great human character, and that's only strengthened by the fact that he's played by Ernie Hudson himself of Ghostbusters fame. Ernie Hudson absolutely sells it as Agent Fowler, who's like this really patriotic, like, American, like, soldier, and he's just great, like, and basically comes in just hamming it up with Optimus, basically accusing him of causing mass chaos on the streets with Bulkhead, Bumblebee, and RC's fight with the Viacons back in episode 1, but then Optimus assures Fowler that everything's alright because no humans were harmed and everything's alright. And then it's at this point also that Bulkhead starts a meme that spreads the entire show, and not just between Bulkhead and Ratchet with the whole "I needed it" that thing. And it's a cute little thing that just constantly gets referenced to later on throughout the series, that I won't spend too much time to it, but it sets up the meme that I'll be sure to get back into this if I ever decide to go ahead and review later episodes. So it's at this point that after telling Fowler that basically everything's okay, he leaves and the humans come back. So it's shortly after that then that we cut back to Megatron and Starscream at the Energon mine, who decide to test the Dark Energon out on Cliffjumper's body. And this is where things get pretty like scary, like dark as well for Transformers, as well as Megatron just straight up plunges the Dark Energon shard into Cliffjumper's chest. His whole body starts to glow purple, and we see him slowly come back to life, but not in a sense that he's totally under Megatron's control, but just in the fact that he's basically a zombie, for like lack of terms. And it's really cool to see that, again, we've never, to my knowledge, we've never really seen zombie, like, Transformers in a thing before. And while yes, it's kind of like, well, like, zombies in fiction aren't like a thing that's new per se, to have actual, like, zombie Transformers, for lack of better terms, is a really cool concept, and it makes you wonder how it took Hasbro 30 years for this to happen. Again, though, I might just be misremembering things, so if it's actually happened before Transformers Prime, feel free to let me know in the comments below. This is just from my knowledge with the Transformers franchise. So Cliffjumper just ends up breaking out of his restraints and starts tearing apart 2 Viacons. It's not super brutal, but we do see a few, like, sparks fly and, like, a few, like, pieces of metal and scrap flying around, and eventually, like, he gets to the point where he ends up going after Megatron, who then decides to go ahead and gives Hasbro some good ideas, inspiration for when they make the Bumblebee movie 8 years in the future, if you know what I mean, with splitting him in half. And so it's at this point that Megatron is satisfied with the results of Dark Energon and basically just has Starscream continue about his work. So it's shortly after that when Ratchet picks up Cliffjumper's life signal again, having been turned back on when Megatron revived him with the Dark Energon, and basically everyone is shocked by this, especially RC, who looks really relieved to see it, and she immediately wants to go ahead and go after Cliffjumper, even though it might be a trap. So Optimus and the rest of the Autobots, minus Ratchet, go ahead and take a ground bridge to the Energon mine where the Decepticons have Cliffjumper's body, leaving Ratchet in charge of the kids. And so we get a really cool, like, infiltration fight scene here with Optimus, RC, Bumblebee, and Bulkhead fighting off all the Viacons as they basically infiltrate the mine to try and find Cliffjumper. And then when Megatron hears from Starscream that the mine is being attacked by Optimus and the rest of the Autobots. Megatron just tells him to just go ahead and blow the mine up, which, again, just shows how ruthless Prime Megatron is. And it really like, I'm sorry, I can't keep getting over it by just how well Frank Welker nails Prime Megatron. The fact that he sounds like, even though it's Frank Welker still voicing him, he sounds like a totally different character from G1 Megatron. Well, G1 Megatron, he was kind of like, he had a lot higher pitch in his tone. He was a lot like a comical villain, where he still was ruthless and all that. He was just kind of played for laughs a bit. But this Prime Megatron, he's, again, like Starscream, dark, brooding. He's really, really threatening. And, like, when you hear Frank Welker's aged voice come out of Megatron's mouth, you think of yourself, oh my god, this is a guy I want to be scared of. And it really, really works well with that. And I'm glad to see that Frank Welker's new take on Megatron worked out so well. It's then during this fight that Optimus and RC notice Cliffjumper's like body seems to be alive to them on top, like atop of a few platforms. So RC offers to go up and get Cliffjumper while Optimus and the rest of the Autobots cover her. And we get this really, like, oddly sad moment of when RC finally gets up to see Cliffjumper, and when she's in, like, first in horror about seeing him, like, well, cut in half, basically. Cliffjumper then, like, reaches up and tries to attack her, now being a zombified Terrorcon. I think they're called Terrorcons in this, but again, it's been a while since I've seen Transformers Prime. He goes to attack RC, but just as he's about to get to her, the platform that he's on breaks off, and RC, unable to hold on to Cliffjumper for too long, ends up letting him go and falling to his death. Finally, Cliffjumper is officially dead, and again, I should say that again. So, RC, who's just totally devastated by basically just watching Cliffjumper die in front of her again, is basically, she decides to leave Cliffjumper's body and goes to retreat with, Optimus and the rest of the Autobots, just as Megatron and Starscream blow up the mine, and then they manage to get off just when they do. And it's, again, I'm not quite sure, like, RC's next reaction here is from the Dark Energon that she came into contact with by being attacked by Cliffjumper, or if it's just from her being, like, so deeply affected by Cliffjumper's death, or even a mix of both, that we see her actually, like, visibly dizzy and sick because of, after seeing Cliffjumper die. And I think more so this is just the fact of her being infected with Dark Energon a bit than it is with her being like devastated by Cliffjumper's loss, though I'm sure it's, like, you could argue it's a bit of both. And it's cool to see, like, Miko, Jack, and Raph's reaction to this, like, not expecting the Autobots to be, like, so emotional. And it really shows them, like, just how much the Autobots, like, are, like, emotive in this season. Like, and while in, like, previous ones, like the G1 and Bayverse, where they are kind of, like, more one-dimensional, seeing, like, have these characters go through actual story arcs and feel emotions really helps. Like, that's why people love Transformers Prime so much, because the characters in it were phenomenal, and this is only just further strengthened by just how well Sully Montano, Josh Keaton, Andy Pessoa, and Tanya Gunati, who plays Miko, sell their characters. It's just absolutely great. And so, well, after RC and everyone comes back, Optimus has Ratchet take RC for a decontamination to try and see if they can figure out, like, what the Dark Energon is on her. And it's at this point then when Jack tells Optimus that they need to that Miko, and Raph need to head back to their parents, or else they're gonna be worried about them. And it's really funny here when Jack says that, oh, he needs to come back or else his mom's gonna call the cops on him, and then Optimus, in the most straightest face ever, just leans right into him and goes like, have you broken a law? And it's like, and again, it's just stuff like that even though Prime Optimus is far more serious compared to, like, G1 Optimus or animated Optimus, the fact that Prime Optimus can even have these dry moments of humor, and it's just stuff like this, because even though Prime is arguably a much more darker show than G1 or animated, it still has moments that have actual genuine moments of humor that don't feel forced or whatever. And I think that, again, really a testament to the writers of this show, who did such a great job with, like, basically making these characters feel three-dimensional. So, of course, we have all the Autobots escort the kids home and basically act as their guardians, with Bumblebee becoming Raph's guardian, Bulkhead becoming Miko's guardian, and RC becoming Jack's guardian. So while we see everyone leave, we follow Jack and RC as they head back to his home. And so Jack is like seeming getting ready to like tell RC goodbye, but before RC and basically says that he's sorry for her loss about Cliffjumper, but before RC can leave, it's when we see Jack's mother June come up from work. So RC unfortunately has to hide in her alt mode as basically a motorcycle that Jack bought. And the conversations Jack has with his mom here, it feels so genuine, and it feels like something straight out of the Bayverse films in my opinion. And it's only further strengthened by the fact that just how well Marky Post does as June's voice, and the fact that it's not just like a one-time thing here that, oh, Hasbro just wanted to put her in this one scene just to make it so that the show feels less like barren, and that Jack actually has a mom that he just doesn't just talk about for the entire show. The fact that June actually comes back in later episodes as a minor character, and later even just a somewhat major character throughout the show, really shows just how much the show develops over time. That such a minor character in the beginning of the show ends up becoming a decently important character by the end of it, and in my opinion is a testament of just how well this show works. And again, just it sets up a really a bunch of nice little nods between them when June just basically threatens Jack with making sure he always wear his helmet when he rides RC, not knowing that RC is actually alive, and that thinking that he just bought her at a store or something like that. And so yeah, it basically just ends with RC being left in the garage for the night while Jack and June go to bed inside the home. It's after that when Jack wakes up to find that RC seems to be gone, but then she just comes back in the garage telling Jack that they need to head to Optimus's place. And again, we get a great little line here between RC and Jack when they leave about just when, because it just seems so out of place here when just how considering how much of a loner type RC is, with the fact that she says this to Jack when they're getting ready to go back to the Autobot HQ. It's such again, just another greatly position line of humor that works so well in a mostly dark cartoon.
Grab your helmet. It's go time.
Oh, it's Saturday.
You can watch cartoons back at base with Bumblebee.
Cartoons? I'm 16.
And leave a note for your mom. She worries.
Again, I just love the tone that RC gives when she yells at Jack to leave a note for his mom, because it feels so weird to hear RC of all characters telling Jack. That's something you would expect Optimus or even maybe Bulkhead to say, but the fact that RC is the one saying it and the way Sumi Montano delivers that line is absolutely great. But as they leave, we cut back to Megatron and Starscream back on their ship, and basically Megatron is doubtful that Optimus actually died in the mine explosion, thinks that he's going to be still going to be an interference in Megatron's plan to essentially create an army of dead Cybertronians to use to take over Earth and wipe out the Autobots. So Starscream thinks that Megatron's worrying too much and believes that perhaps that he's been too exposed to Dark Energon, that all the Dark Energon has been getting to his head, and Megatron says he's fine by it, decides to just go ahead and straight up stab himself in the chest with Dark Energon, much to Starscream's shock. And we get a really cool effect here when Megatron uses Dark Energon on himself, and the fact that his whole body seems to glow purple. We see purple veins almost just start glowing up brightly across his entire body. His eyes turn purple as well. And it's really cool to see this is the first time we see Megatron actually use Dark Energon. It sets up Megatron's character for the rest of this series, in which we see him slowly become more obsessed with Dark Energon as a means to power himself and feel like it's what he needs to win over Optimus. And something we see him and it just, again, I love how characters progress this arc, even for the worst, where we see Megatron slowly go from a more cold and calculating villain to a much more ruthless one by the end of the series, and it's really cool in my opinion. After that, we get to the end of the episode when Ratchet is just alone in the Autobot base, experimenting with the Dark Energon that he recovered off of RC, and during so he spills some of it onto a piece of piece of equipment that Bulkhead broke back earlier on in the episode, and the Dark Energon ends up bringing it back to life, and it seems as though it gets ready to attack Ratchet. Now, this is, again, I can't keep stressing this enough at just how much this show has been based off Bayverse, because this seems straight out of Revenge of the Fallen, when Sam has the shard of the Allspark, and it brings to life all the electric appliances in his house that like try to kill him then, or even just throughout the first Bayverse movie as well, when the Allspark had the power to turn just regular pieces of machinery into Cybertronians. And to an extent, this happened as well in the new Bumblebee movie, when Bumblebee ends up plugging himself into an outlet and ends up turning all the appliances into what do you call it, alive. But even though that kind of only happened in a deleted scene, but again, all this feels very, very Bayverse inspired, but it takes the good parts of it. That's what I'm trying to stress here. It takes the good parts of what Bayverse could have done and actually basically puts them out and uses them and tries to have a good execution with them, which I think turns out very, very well for this show. And so that was my review of Transformers Prime Season 1, Episodes 1 and 2, Darkness Rising, Parts 1 and 2. And I'll be honest, this wasn't so much a review as it was just a me ranting on how much I love Transformers Prime. If you, again, I don't even think this needs saying, but I am very confident in giving Episodes 1 and 2, Darkness Rising Parts 1 and 2, flat out 10s out of 10. These episodes were fantastic. Great job in introducing all these new characters. They took some really cool risks that paid off well, with like killing off Cliffjumper in the first 5 minutes of the first episode, having really brutal fights for a kids show, and even having likable characters that I like on both sides, Autobots, Decepticons, even the humans I really like too. Everything about the show was so great, and it's so glad to see that everything, for the most part, I will admit, having come back and see the animation of the show does feel a little aged, but that's not going to get in the way of me enjoying the show. But just having everything just seems so, like, feel so well put together, even after 10 years, even though the first time I watched Prime was 5 years ago, when Robots in Disguise 2015 came out. Having this show finally still feel good and fresh after 10 years is just great, in my opinion, and it really cements that why so many people think of this as the best Transformers cartoon. So that's going to be it for this review. I'll be back soon around December 1st when I'll have my review of the next 3 episodes of the Transformers Prime pilot, Darkness Rising Parts 3, 4, and 5. If you like this review, be sure to like, comment, and of course subscribe, and I will see you guys later.